we're going to go ahead and start since we've got a full house here. It's great to see everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this fun lecture we're going to have. I'm Adrienne Northington, for those of you who do not know me. I'm a member of the Foundation Arts and Humanities Committee, and I have the great pleasure of introducing Tommy Jarrett tonight as our speaker. This is Tommy's third lecture that he's given through the foundation, and we're looking forward to his interesting and colorful lecture tonight. For those of you who don't know Tommy, he is an attorney in Goldsboro and has practiced in Goldsboro for 50 years. He was raised in the southwestern mountains of North Carolina and received his undergraduate degree and his law degree from UNC Chapel Hill. So he's a very die-hard Carolina sports fan. He served as trustee of Wayne Community College for 16 years and was a Wayne County Commissioner for 4, and his wife Sterling, and they have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. So Tommy, come on up and tell us about the World War II story, 2 NC lawyers and 8 German saboteurs.
The Saboteurs, yeah. Thank you. I've worked on this thing for literally over a year. I knew exactly what I was going to say. I knew exactly when I was going to say it. And then Jim Womble walks up and starts talking about Carolina football. It blew everything I had right clean out. I don't know where I'm going with this thing. There's no telling what we got here. Well, every story has a beginning. This is a World War II story, but I think it started in July the 30th of 1916, on the New Jersey side of the New York Harbor. What you see there is a replica, a poorly drawn replica, of a wharf and a railroad/shipping complex that existed in 1916. In 1916, as we know, there was a war going on in Europe. We were not parties to it, but we were allowing munitions to be sold to England and her allies, and a lot of the munitions left from this port. This is on the New Jersey side. Off the map there is the Statue of Liberty, just off to the left. If you call that the front, it would be right up there. So on the night of, and it was a well-known secret that munitions were being shipped out of here. And it was a kind of an interesting concept. It doesn't show on here, but there were lots of railroads running up and down this thing. And they would bring in rail boxcars that have munitions, and they'd just sit there waiting on a ship to come. And they had barges loaded, and the ship would come, and if it was a great big ship, of course, they'd have to take a barge and take it out. And the reverse was true. A cargo would come in, and they'd put it on boxcars, and the boxcars would wait for trains, and it would go that way and go out. It's a pretty ingenious situation that we had going there. But it was a well-known secret that munitions were being shipped to England and her allies. And for a year, the Germans planned on what they were going to do. So on the night of July 30, 1916, one German walked in, 2 Germans came by rowboat, and they worked practically all night planning fuses, delayed explosions, and the like. And in the early morning hours, it was still dark, and there were several explosions, one of which was known for years as the largest man-made explosion in history. It blew everywhere, shattered windows for miles. It wrecked the whole complex. The complex finally just kind of settled in the mud, and it's not there anymore. After a time, of course, that explosion became known as the largest man-made non-nuclear explosion in the world. I don't know how it ranks now, but anyway, that's where I think this story started. There you see it today. This is a modern, up-to-date photo. It's down here in the corner. that you see, and you can see the Statue of Liberty right out there. And the Statue of Liberty was much closer to the original thing that you saw a while ago. And the explosion was so loud, this is just a tidbit of history, the explosion was so loud that it ruined the right arm of the statue. And you can't go up into that arm, even after 1985, when they did a rehabilitation of the statue, you still can't go up into that arm because they deem it insecure, all relating back to this, this incident that I've described. There's a picture of two people who were paid. They had no official role in anything. One was a young fellow, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Franklin Roosevelt. The other was a German admiral, Admiral Canaris. They were paying attention. And as Andy Griffith says, remember that because you will need it later on. Okay, I'm going to switch over now, since we're talking about 1916, I'm going to switch over now and give you a partial biological sketch of one of the people that we're going to be talking about tonight, Albert Lyman Cox. He was born in Wake County in 1883. He went to Horner Military School. He went to UNC, where he was an athlete and student leader. He went to Harvard Law School, and he got admitted to the Massachusetts bar up there, and then he got admitted to North Carolina bar. He was in the legislature. He was a Superior Court judge, the youngest one ever until that time. And he did something here that impressed me. He resigned from the Superior Court to become a colonel in the U.S. Army, commanding the North Carolina 1st Artillery Field Unit, which later became the 113th Field Artillery Unit with service in World War I. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his service in World War I. I don't know any, I've known judges to resign, but I've never known one to resign to become a colonel, knowing there was a high degree of probability that he would go somewhere and get shot at. That's the only one I know of. After the war in 1919, he led a victory parade in Raleigh, where 75,000 people were in attendance. I think Raleigh had a population of something like maybe 40 to 50,000 people, so it was a well-attended event. In 1919, he returned to civilian life and practiced law, and also campaigned across North Carolina, urging the people to buy war bonds to help pay for the war effort, that is World War I. He remained in the National Guard. In 1922, he continued with the practice of law in North Carolina and was promoted to Brigadier General in the National Guard. I call it the National Guard. They may have called it something else then, but it's what we would call the National Guard. In 1933, he moved with his family to Washington, D.C., continued to practice law, and later became the Provost Marshall of the Military District of Washington, D.C. It might be said that the Provost Marshal is the chief law enforcement officer within any military establishment. And since they had it divided up then, he was the Provost Marshal for Washington, D.C., which sort of made him like a sheriff or a something of that nature. In 1942, as Provost Marshal, he gained custody of the 8 German saboteurs that we will be meeting shortly. And I put this at the bottom. I just can't count all the civil endeavors under which he took, as they would be just too numerous to mention. Here you can see from volume 172 of the North Carolina reports, they always report who the judges are. You can see the check mark up there. This was 1916, Albert L. Cox, 7th District from Wake County. There is a young fellow on the left, and here he is on the right with FDR in 1938. They are reviewing a military parade. I'm going to give you a partial biographical sketch of Kenneth Claiborne Royall. He's about a half a generation younger, I would say, than the general. He graduated from Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia. He attended University of North Carolina at Phi Beta Kappa. He too went to Harvard Law School. He was associate editor of the Harvard Law Review. And I stuck this in there. I say he probably was a student of Felix Frankfurter, later U.S. Supreme Court Justice. In 1917, he joined the Army and was commissioned as a lieutenant. In 1918 and 1919, he served in World War I and was wounded. I thought it was significant. He volunteered for the Army after he graduated from law school. In 1919, he began to practice law in Goldsboro. He served as a state senator. He was president of the North Carolina Bar Association. I think we've had 3. Lindsey Warren was number 2. And Shelby Benton, thank you. Shelby is number 3. He formed the law firm of Eringhouse, Royall, Gosney, and Smith and practiced law in Goldsboro. Probably the Eringhouse was Governor Eringhouse. I don't know that that's true. I'm making that assumption. And the Smith was our own James N. Smith, who's Margie Smith's father. I knew him. He was a fine person. In 1942, he rejoined the United States Army as a colonel at the request of Undersecretary of State of War Robert Patterson. He served in Washington, D.C. He had just been in there less than a month, or about a month, when he was appointed to represent 7 out of the 8 German saboteurs whom we're going to meet shortly. Was Kenneth Royall a friend of Felix Frankfurter? I say that he was. I asked William Dees, my mentor, one time, I said, how did Kenneth Royall get appointed to represent those German saboteurs? He said, I don't know, but I've always heard that Felix Frankfurter had something to do with it. So I don't know, but I've heard, now you've heard that Felix Frankfurter had something to do with it. I read a humorous thing about Felix Frankfurter. When he got nominated by FDR for the Supreme Court, I think in 1939, Time magazine ran an article about him, and it's if you got a Frankfurter here, and he's all the time getting his pupils jobs, they referred to them as the happy hot dogs. And I asked the question, was Kenneth Royall a happy hot dog? I don't think he was, because he was an accomplished person before he ever got appointed. He was accomplished. He'd done a lot back here in North Carolina. So I don't think he was a happy hot dog, but he may have gotten a nudge, or he may have gotten some sort of, Felix Frankfurter might have put a good word in for him. I don't know. Anyhow. Okay. To understand all of these events in which we're about to discuss, one must understand the context of the times in which they have evolved. We know that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. We know we declared war on Japan the next day. A few days later, Germany declared war on the United States, and before the day was out, the United States declared war back on Germany. Germany was ready for war, and we were not. And one of the things that Germany did that bothered our leaders a lot and irritated our people a lot was that they had a full-fledged submarine force over here in the Atlantic Ocean, up and down the Atlantic coast, in the Caribbean, and down on the Gulf Coast. And they caused a lot of trouble, a lot of heartache, and we were still smarting from what they did up to and through World War I. When Woodrow Wilson sent his message to Congress asking for a declaration of war, Woodrow Wilson, as being a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and being the former president of Princeton University, used this, what I'll call it, academic terminology when he accused the Germans of cruel and unmanly use of submarines. Cruel and unmanly use. Boy, at any rate, he got his declaration of war, and for a lot of World War I, those submarines kept England bottled up pretty bad. And when the Nazis took over, they weren't supposed to do it under the treaty, so they started building submarines in 1933. So they were fully manned. They had a lot of them. They were good submarines. They dove quickly, and they were accurate with their torpedoes. If you've to get a still better idea, this is kind of an aside, but it meant something to me. When we were trying to fight those submarines, the Civil Air Patrol, they deserve a lot of credit. These guys owned their own airplanes, and they had to go out and spot trying to locate submarines. Some of them even jury-rigged their own planes to put crude bombs on their own planes they could throw out and hit the submarines. England loaned us 12 trawlers, I think, for the East Coast here. One of them was the HMS Bedfordshire. And a trawler was just a fishing boat we're not talking about a shrimp boat now. We're talking about something more substantial than that. Trawler was a long boat with a hold in the middle for the catch of the day. So what they did, they mounted 1 or 2 guns up on the deck to give it some offensive capability, and they filled that hold full of mines and depth charges to drop on the submarines. They were manned. They were under the control of the United States Navy. They were manned by British sailors. This one got torpedoed on May 11, and remember, this is what we're going to talk about this time. On May 11 of 1942, it got torpedoed, and 30 sailors went to the bottom. 4 of them washed ashore down there at Ocracoke. If you've never been to Ocracoke, I urge you to go. You'll see beaches that are the same way they were when the Europeans first arrived, and you'll see that cemetery where there's 4 British sailors. So this is kind of the situation that they faced, that we faced. And you say, well, what does that have to do with these guys that we're getting to? It has everything to do, or much to do with it. The people in the United States feared and hated the German submarine force, and with good reason. So the Germans wanted to duplicate their success in 1916 in the New York Harbor. They did some other sabotage too, but the one I talked about first was the one that did the most damage. Okay, who were the saboteurs? They chose 12. All of them had lived in the United States. They could speak English very well. 2 of them were United States citizens. Berger was, and Hapt, he was a United States citizen, but most of them had just lived here. The leader of the crowd was a guy by the name of George John Dash. You're going to hear a lot about him. Dash actually helped the German High Command develop a sabotage school. They sent all these guys to the sabotage school. In my opinion, they didn't go there long enough, but they went. They went to sabotage school. They learned how to blow up things with incendiaries and bombs and delayed fuses and those kinds of things. And then after they went to sabotage school for 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it was, they then took them around Germany and they showed them these industries that they liked the ones they were going to try to blow up in the United States, like dams, locks on rivers, different kinds of industries where you could place the bomb and get do the most damage. They did that, and then they're going to come to the United States. So they didn't choose all 12. They held 4 back. They had 4 that left. Both submarines left from occupied France. The first one that left was going to Florida. I think it had further to go. The second one that left was coming to New York to Long Island. I think it arrived first. Show us that. Okay, there's the 8. George John Dash, he's the leader of all 8. Curling down here is the leader, but he was the team leader of Group 1. Dash was the overall leader of all 8. Curling was the leader of Group 2 that landed in Florida. Florida landed last. They landed without a hitch. From the German standpoint, everything went right. But when they landed in New York, they landed there first, things didn't go necessarily right. What they did was submarine has to surface, and they show me. Let's see where it landed. There, it landed approximately what is now Atlantic Avenue, and that submarine was probably about 600 or 700 yards out in the water. And so what happened was they landed 4 saboteurs and 2 German sailors. The sailors were in there to help paddle to get the rubber boat to shore, and it was tethered on a rope so that the sailors could pull the rope and pull themselves back. So they get up on the beach, and Dash is on this boat. He gets off first. He runs up to the dunes where he could stand and see, and he didn't like what he saw. He saw a light over here. He saw a light over there. In my opinion, one of two things happened. They either chose a bad landing site or they landed at the wrong place. But it was not a good event from the German standpoint. So anyway, they're scurrying around, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to take their uniforms off, and the uniforms are supposed to be taken back with the two submarines back to the sub. And they looked, and down the beach comes a flashlight. And this flashlight was held by this Coast Guardsman by the name of Curran. And he said the fog was so thick, he said I could hardly see my feet. So Dash saw that flashlight coming. And so, now what he's supposed to do, he thought they've been given orders on what to do. If they meet light resistance, they're supposed to overpower the resistance. And they're supposed to take the man and put him in with those two sailors, man or men if there's like a couple of men, and they go back out to the submarine. That's what the protocol called for. Well, Dash made an election. He went over and tried to jawbone him. He went over and he said, you know, we're fishermen. We've landed at the wrong place. We're getting straightened out. Everything's all right. Just go on about your way and thank you. And the Coast Guardsman said, well, we'll help you. Come with me down to the Coast Guard station. He said, no, we don't need to go down to the Coast Guard station. And then the wheels really began to run off. Dash, when I think it was Berger, came down the beach to where those two guys were, and it was a real mistake. He spoke to Dash in German. I didn't say these guys were smart. I said these were saboteurs. At any rate, whoa, wait a minute, we got a problem here. Then Dash tries to bribe him. And I'll talk about the money they had in just a minute. They had plenty of money, but Dash he's got cash, U.S. cash. He tries to bribe him, and Cullen, the Coast Guardsman, he fakes that he's being bribed. Dash tells him, here's $300. You're a young man. I know you got a family. You just take the money and go on, and we're going to go on, and everything's going to be all right. And so he got shortchanged $20, but he took the money, and he went on back to his Coast Guard station, and the first thing he said was, Germans on the beach. And so the two sailors, they were supposed to take those uniforms they had on back out to the ship. Those guys, they were getting the heck out of Dodge. They were going as hard as they could go to get back to that submarine. The reason that they were wearing those uniforms was they wanted, if they came ashore and they were met with overpowering resistance, they were supposed to surrender, and they were wearing uniforms. The idea was that would protect them, and they would get prisoner of war status. That's why they were wearing those uniforms. When they took those uniforms off, whatever protection that they had vanished. So now they've got an issue. So what they do, they get into dunes and they hunker down for a while. They figure they might be surrounded. They weren't, so they became emboldened. They started walking. They came to a railroad. They got on the railroad. They walked the railroad track till they came to a train station. As I say, they had plenty of money. They bought train tickets into New York, stayed at a hotel, and it looked like, at least temporarily, at least, they had gotten by it. However, the Coast Guard took the time to arm a party. Guys were going to go down there and do some damage if they had to, and they went down there. And of course, they found where they had dug, and it was fresh digging. They found all the stuff, and then and what the main thing was the uniforms, but they also had 4 boxes of fuses and explosives, delayed detonators, and those kinds of things. Not big bombs, of course, but stuff that would enable you to make a bomb with other materials. So Dash has figured this thing out. And as I say, they got plenty of money, because what they did was they gave each of those men, I'd say $500, what I'd call walking around money. Each of them carried $9,000. This is American currency, carried $9,000, which was 2 years' pay. And each of the group leaders, that would be Dash and Curling, each had $50,000. I looked it up. $50,000 in 1942 is worth $945,000 today. That's a lot of money. That would buy a lot of material later on. So at any rate, the next day, I guess Dash has been thinking all night about it. So the next day, he and Berger agreed to defect to the United States. And so he makes a phone call to the FBI, and they don't believe him. So he then gets on a train. In the meantime, Berger's job is to babysit the other two guys. So then he gets on the train, and he goes down to the headquarters of the FBI, and again, they don't believe him. But when he pulls out all the money, they said, well, wait a minute here. So then they did decide to believe him. And then not only did he tell about his three friends back in New York in the hotel room, he also told them, hey, there's another group that's either landed or going to land south of Jacksonville, Florida. And he told about them too. And it became apparent real quick that Dash is trying to save his skin. That's exactly what he was trying to do. And so he started out, and the FBI is really there. They're on his team. They've sold him a bill of goods. We're going to get you a few years in prison. Everything's going to be all right. Until he read in the paper where FDR had referred it to a military commission, and they're going to try to execute him. Well, he made a 12-page statement. Yeah, front and back, about 12 pages. Lengthy statement about everything. He divulged everything. But by the time he got around to signing it, then he learned that, wait a minute, they're getting ready to, they're serious about this thing. And so he never did sign that statement, but I've used a lot of stuff that was in that document that he didn't sign. Here's what he said the mission was. This is Dash talking through his unsigned statement. Group number 1, of which I was the leader, was instructed to attack particularly the light metal industry of the United States. Our first objective was the Aluminum Company of America plant at Alcoa, Tennessee. Our second objective was the Aluminum Company of America plant at East St. Louis, Illinois. Our third objective was to attack the Creolite plant at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And our fourth objective was to attack the locks on the river dams located along the Ohio River from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Louisville, Kentucky. Having successfully accomplished our attacks on these 4 objectives, we were then instructed to conduct a general nuisance type of sabotage wherever the judgment of the leader indicated the most damage and confusion would result. And then this is a good one right here. Such as throwing bombs in department stores operated by Jews, in railroad stations and other like places. Then he continues, group number 2, that's the Florida group, headed by Curling, was instructed by the German High Command to attack, as I recall, first, a large light metal plant near Niagara Falls, New York. Second, the Pennsylvania Railway Station at Newark, New Jersey. Third, the railroad bridge over Hell's Gate, East River, New York. And fourth, various points along the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, which was considered a very strategic railroad in the United States. After completing the above assignments, group number 2 was also instructed to conduct a general nuisance type of sabotage similar to the instructions of group number 1, general nuisance being bombing department stores owned by Jews in railroad stations and like places. They were switching from sabotage over to terrorism, it looked to me like. And there was one other thing he later said. They were also to recruit like-minded people to assist them. That was their message that they were going to do. So that's the place in Florida where the Florida group landed. One more thing I want to point out. They were not going to start blowing stuff up immediately. They were instructed to re-immerse themselves into American culture for 2 months so they could, again, learn what was going on, so they could talk politics or current events and those kinds of things. And then they were to look at these sites and decide the best way and how much was needed, et cetera, to try to blow up what I just told you. So they weren't going to go throw bombs immediately. Go ahead. Okay, they've been caught. It says it was easy for the FBI to arrest the other 6, 7 if you count Berger, but I don't count him because he had flipped. The saboteurs had a schedule where they were going to appear and at what time the FBI was waiting. Well, for example, they knew they were going to meet, 8 of them were going to meet at a hotel on the 4th of July in Cincinnati. Well, the FBI goes to the hotel and waits, and the Florida crowd doesn't know that the New York crowd has been arrested. They kept it all quiet. The FBI kept that bottled up. So it was fairly easy to round them up. So Biddle, Attorney General Biddle went to FDR and he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix it so we could try Hapt and Berger with treason because they're American citizens, but I don't see any utility in doing that. We can try them with something. They'll get a few years in prison, and or we could just hold them as prisoners of war till the war's over. FDR was having none of it. I mean, none of it. He said, no. He took a page right out of the Abraham Lincoln playbook. He said, no, I'm going to put them up in front of a military commission, and I'm going to see to it that they're tried for their lives. Well, that's when by that time, that's when Daesh got the message. He got it. So he did. So I want to point out one thing. You probably ask, what is a military commission? They've been called military tribunals. The official name now in the statute is military commission. These were famous trials that you probably heard about. Nathan Hale, who regretted only having one life to give for his country, he was sent on a spy mission and got caught. Spy mission, didn't have a uniform on. Major Andre, he was a conspirator with Benedict Arnold when Benedict Arnold was committing treason against the United States. He wanted to go that way to go back. He should have gone that way. He got caught. He was put on trial, was convicted at the orders of George Washington. He was put on trial and convicted. And he said, I demand to be shot by firing squad. That's the way a soldier would die. And they said, we don't care, we're going to hang you. And they did. John Wilkes Booth, co-conspirators. This is the last time that a military commission was ever used to try civilians. Supreme Court has held after this case that you could not try civilians if the civilian courts are open and operating. So what they did, poor Mrs. Surratt ran the boarding house where all the conspirators would come, including John Wilkes Booth. He showed up a time or two. So I think there were like 8 of them. John Wilkes Booth was killed in a barn on his escape. He was killed in Northern Virginia, I think. So he wasn't tried, but Mrs. Surratt was tried and some others. And by golly, they hung 4 of them, including Mrs. Surratt. And bless her heart, what she said before they hung her was, well, please make sure I don't fall. There was another, this is funny, but it's not funny, but it's funny. Does that make sense? But there was another trial that went to the Supreme Court, ex parte Milligan, after the Mrs. Surratt's problem. And the Supreme Court of the United States held you cannot try a civilian before a military commission if the civilian courts are open and operating. And in this case, Washington, D.C., the civilian courts were open and operating. What's the difference between a military commission and a civilian court? We'll talk more about that in a minute. But a civilian court is well, let's go ahead and click on it. Let's move. Okay, back up one thing. We got Colonel Royall's duty. What was Colonel Royall's duty? Colonel Royall saw his duty to try to save the lives of 7 of the 8 saboteurs. He only represented 7. He didn't represent Dash now. And he thought, and he was right, the best way to save their lives was to get them over in a civilian court. So his aim that we're going to be discussing was to do his very best to get them away from that military commission and get that trial over in a civilian court. General Cox's duty, and they called in General Cox. Remember, he's the man who has custody of these folks. And they said, I think Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, called him in and said, there will be no escape. No escape. So what his duty was security, security, security. So what he did, that they chose, and I think that's a picture of it, that they chose a women's prison in Washington, D.C. as a place simply because they had rooms there. So what they did was, I think they put them up on the 2nd floor, and what they did was they'd put one saboteur in a cell, then they skip a cell, nobody. Then a saboteur, and skip, saboteur, skip. And the reason for that was it cut down on the communication they had between each other. If you can't communicate, you're probably less likely going to try to escape. So this guy's out, this MP's outside with a M1 rifle, I presume. That's the longest bayonet I think I've ever seen in my life. And I think that bayonet is that long to say, stay away, get away, you're not wanted here. And he would be just one of them. Anyway, give me another. All right. Okay. Colonel Royall, in my opinion, had only 2 tools in his toolbox. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the Constitution. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. And then he had one more little tool, which was the 28 U.S. Code Section 451. It says, the Supreme Court and the district courts shall have power to issue writs of habeas corpus. So that's where he started out, and that's what he's working with. And he was really short-handed, to tell the truth. On the other side, the Attorney General was opposed to him, and on the other side, also the Judge Advocate General of the Army was opposed to him, and they had unlimited resources. He had, as far as I know, he had one guy to help him write briefs, and he found one guy, a young captain, to help him do research. And that was an interesting comment that captain made. He said when he reported to Colonel Royall, he said, he used the word euphoric. Colonel Royall was euphoric that he had somebody who knew something about federal courts, because this captain had clerked for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But clerking for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and defending a military commission, those are 2 different worlds. And he said, when Colonel Royall left in a euphoric mood because he had me, he said, I knew less about it than Colonel Royall. So at any rate, okay, I made this little diagram here. The civilian courts, I'm going to call Article 3 courts. At the bottom rung is U.S. District Court, U.S. Courts of Appeal, U.S. Supreme Court. And these military commissions, they are Articles 1 and 2. They're authorized, but under Articles 1 and 2 of the Constitution. The President is Commander-in-Chief, that part. Then there's a part in the Constitution that the Congress, in Article 1 of the Constitution, where the Congress has the right to make rules for those captured on land or sea. And this military commission, I think, falls under that. Okay? So now, you see this diagram over here. This is a diagram that I have tried to make. So my friend, Mr. Royall back here, will maybe know what his granddaddy was trying to do. And I give him great credit. It's a heck of a good job of lawyering. Step 1, or it may have been step 2, might have been first. At any rate, he filed in the U.S. District Court, and he also filed an application, I think, in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, he goes in, and the Supreme Court talks with him, and they're deciding, and as in Wayne, they say in Wayne County, they couldn't get an agreement on exactly what to do, but finally they did. So here's what happened. He lost. I'll show you the court opinion in a minute. Down in step 1, Colonel Royall lost that decision. The judge wrote a 2-sentence opinion denying him. So then he had his other thing that he filed directly in the Supreme Court, because you remember that statute I cited said the district court could issue writs and the Supreme Court could issue writs. So but what they decided to do was, and I give the Supreme Court and the government, they all came to this agreement, was that the third step, Colonel Royall would appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia. All right. And then he filed step 4, a petition for a writ of certiorari in the Supreme Court, which issued an order in number 5, resulting in number 6, and that brought the case to the Supreme Court. The end result was the case got into the Supreme Court, and it was a darn good bit of lawyer in it on the part of Colonel Royall, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. All right, there's the opinion of the district court. As I counted that up, that was 2 sentences long. I think, yeah, Petitioner Richard Kieran asked the court for leave to file a petition of writ of habeas corpus, and then all that next sentence, no, excuse me, 3 sentences. Anyway, it was denied. All right, so here's what they did. When they got it in the Supreme Court, and you'll see General Cox's name, it's in yellow. You see Kenneth Royall's name. They issued a per curiam decision, starting where it says per curiam and all the way down through here. Justice Murphy took no part in the case because he was in the Army himself. He was in the courthouse, but he was wearing an Army uniform, and so he didn't want to, he thought it was a conflict, so he opted out. So what they did was they issued this order, or this per curiam decision. The president of Military Commission appointed by order of the President of July 2, 1942. They allege an offense. The Military Commission was lawfully constituted. The petitioners are held in lawful custody, and the motions for leave to file petitions for writ of habeas corpus are denied. That was what the Supreme Court of the United States said when they wrote their per curiam decision. Okay. All right. Now, they've been tried. They were convicted. All 8 were sentenced to death by the Military Commission. The first paragraph up there I wrote one time. The last little paragraphs I wrote. The thing in the middle, Colonel Cox wrote, the italicized part. I wrote some time ago, all 8 were sentenced to death. President Roosevelt, however, commuted Berger's sentence to life in prison, and Dash's sentence to 30 years. Royall petitioned for clemency for the others, and this petition was denied. The defendants, Sue Curling, wrote a statement thanking their defense counsel, Royall, and their jailers, Cox, for their consideration and fairness. On August 7, 1942, the president ordered the executions to be carried out. And on the morning of August 8, Cox notified each prisoner that his sentence was to be carried out the next day. Chaplains were provided for each. Cox included the following report, which he submitted. The announcement by me of the sentences was a considerable shock to all of the prisoners, except the possible exception of Ernest Peter Berger, who gave no indication of any shock or surprise. The immediate presence of a spiritual advisor was of great help to the prisoners and enabled them to maintain their composure. The chaplains remained with the prisoners from the time I announced the sentences to them until each were pronounced dead. Each chaplain accompanied the prisoner to whom he had been assigned with him while the sentence was being executed. Okay, they were buried in what was called a potter's field. Anybody ever heard of the word potter's field? You're way ahead of me. I've heard of it now. It's over in the southwestern tip of Washington, D.C., and there's 3 of the markers. They had them numbered. That's just 3 of them. There were 6 of them in a row. All right. Now, this thing took, it happened with warp speed. June 13, they land in New York. 15, Dash makes his initial contact. 17th, they land in Florida. 19th, Dash travels to FBI in Washington. June 19th through July 1, all the saboteurs arrested. July 2, approximately, custody of saboteurs placed with Cox. July 2, President appoints military commission. July 3, charges preferred against saboteurs. July 8, trial begins. July 27, trial of the case completed except arguments of counsel. July 29, 30, case argued before the Supreme Court. July 31, Supreme Court rules against saboteurs and issues a per curiam opinion, which you read a minute ago. August 1, military commission trial ends. August 3, saboteurs convicted, all sentenced to die. August 8, Brigadier General Cox notifies each prisoner that the death sentence will be carried out the next day. August 8, President commutes Burgers to life imprisonment and dashes sentence to 30 years. August 8, again, President orders execution of sentence. August 9, 6 of the 8 were electrocuted. And get this, October 29, 1942, the full opinion of the U.S. Supreme Court. Those guys have been dead 3 months, so they come up with their final opinion. And I have read where the longer that they held it, the more divided they became. So they tried to pull back. You can't go undig somebody up, friends. You just can't do it. So at any rate, that's when the full opinion was filed with the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, now I've resumed the biographical sketch of Albert Lyman Cox. On November 1949, he retired with the rank of Major General of the United States Army Reserves. 1949, moved to Goldsboro, residing on Linwood Avenue, and continued his law practice principally relating to estate planning and estate administration. He died April 15, 1965, buried in Willowdale Cemetery. Resumption of Kenneth Royall, 1945, Distinguished Service Medal. 1945, became Undersecretary of War. July 1947, became Secretary of War. August 1947, became the first Secretary of the Army when the defense establishment was reorganized. In 1949, resigned as Secretary of the Army and became a named partner in a Wall Street law firm. 1967, retired to Raleigh. May 25, 1971, he's buried in Willowdale Cemetery, Goldsboro. Now, we wanted to know whether he was a friend of Felix Frankfurter. That little guy in the middle is Felix Frankfurter, and he's getting ready to give Kenneth Royall the oath of office for Undersecretary of State. How many times does a Supreme Court justice go somewhere to give somebody an oath? I'd say it would be one of your friends. That's what I would say. All right. Okay. So I've been worrying about this case, thinking about this case for a long time, and we were going to Washington, D.C. to visit a couple of friends, and Mrs. Jarrett and I decided we were going to go to the graves of the saboteurs. Don't laugh, don't laugh, don't laugh. You know, if you're going to talk about them, go visit them. So we plugged that cemetery into our computer, and it brought us, see where that X is right there? Got out and looked around, no graves that we could see. And if you look at it up there, you see it's a great big, it's a sea of impounded cars. If you ever go to D.C. and get your car impounded, you go down there, you might find some. At any rate, we walked down to and it was this place is fenced in, high 6, 7, 8 feet of wrought iron fence. And so we went down there, and this nice lady, these two nice ladies, they were law enforcement. They had badges and sidearms. And we said, ma'am, we've come to see the graves of the saboteurs. She said, say what? Said, yeah, you know, the Germans. Yeah, and then she said, yeah, I do. She said, I do know what you're talking about. She said, people come here all the time and ask about it, and all the time I say, no, you can't do it. So I said, well, where does it exist? And she pointed, direction she pointed. So we thought about it, and in order to go there, we would have to have backed out, going all the way around to Oxon Hill, Maryland, parked our car somewhere, walked that to a trail. we decided that maybe it was all right that we shouldn't do that, but we wanted to, though. So, with my thanks to two of Goldsboro, North Carolina. Actually, they're both Goldsboro. We claim them both. Kenneth Royall started in Goldsboro, and he ended up here. And General Cox started in Wake County, and he ended up here. And as they say, we thank them both for their service. And anybody have any questions?
Valley World's grandfather.
Well, we know that. Everybody knows that. I was going to recognize these people. Sally Borden World and husband Tony. Raise your hands. Tommy Borden and wife Sarah Francis. Jacqueline Swindell and Ed. Gray Eason and Terry. Okay. All right, and from the Royall group, Jerry Royall and Mary Eloise. Eloise. Raise your hand. And Julia Royall Caravan. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry.
Pamela Royall.
What's your relation?
He was my father's first cousin. Oh.
Wonderful. Well, I better ask anybody else. At any rate, that's the story. I would say Kenneth Royall's representing those guys is in the follows in the footsteps of John Adams when he represented the hated British redcoats for the Boston Massacre. That's strong. And Judge Cox leaving the bench to go take a job where he knows there's a high degree of likelihood that he's going to go to war, that's pretty strong. That's pretty strong. Thank you. Questions?
Yes.
How many years of that 30 years did Dash serve?
Good question. That's a good question. I'll tell you what happened. He served about, he got 30 years and Berger got 30 years. They both served from 42 to about 1948 because things began to turn, remember? The Germans were our enemies until things began to turn, and the Germans sort of became our friends. So they served up till about 1948, and as a follow-up to your follow-up, Dash kept applying to come back to the United States. When Truman was the one who let them serve what they had served and let them go back to Germany. They had to stay in the West Germany. They couldn't go to East Germany. They had to stay in West Germany. That was the group that was on our side. And so that's what happened to him. As I say, Dash kept applying to get back, and they would never let him come back. By the way, that's another footnote. Remember the explosion in 1916? Well, I think they went into some kind of arbitration, and I think they ruled that the Germans owed something like $20 million, and they paid a pittance. Of course, the Nazis never paid anything. But the Federal Republic of Germany, which we knew as West Germany, paid that thing off. and back in the 1980s. I think they wound up paying maybe $80 million, which was more than nothing. Anybody else? Okay, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.